guys, we recently made a video about how to find a job in Canada, and we received an overwhelming set of questions. A lot of people asked, how do I build my resume for Canada? What do employers look for? Well, we decided to make a video to go over some of the fundamental components that make a successful resume. I personally have been on both sides of the fence. I have been in a position of a recruitment manager, of a hiring manager, as well as applicant who really like to change jobs just for fun. I've also served as a career mentor, helping fresh graduates and young immigrants to build out their resumes to land their first job. With all that said, in this video, I'm going to share a number of tips of what makes a successful resume. And before we begin, I'd like to highlight that there are a lot of different ways to build a really good resume. I would encourage you to do your own research and choose something that makes most sense for your role and for your industry. Fun fact for you. Did you know that the resume was invented by Leonardo da Vinci in 1482? That's a very long time ago. So to begin, let's talk a little bit about what is a CV. A CV is actually a digital representation of your experiences and qualifications. This is oftentimes the very first thing your potential employer sees, and it's critical because your resume is what defines whether the recruitment manager is going to move you further along in the recruitment process. Your goal with the CV is not to just highlight your background and your experience and your fit for the role, but also to highlight what is it that makes you so special and what makes you stand out for the role that you're applying for. So next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through a CV template that I've put together based on some of the research and my personal experience. And I will use the role of product manager as I walk you over the CV because that's just the role that I'm most familiar with because I've been doing that for the last decade. So I'm just going to do a rundown through the CV and cover every single section, what it is, what to put in there, why it's important, and some tips and tricks on that. And once we've done that, I'm going to share some additional general considerations for when you're building your CV in the end of this video. Let's begin from the very top of the resume, and let's start with the header. So the header of the resume is typically providing some basic information about you. What's your full name? What's your profession or specialty? This also helps the recruiter identify you. It's also a good practice to add your contact information in there. Make sure you cover your bases, your phone number, your email, link to your LinkedIn account, and your location. You want to make sure that your hiring manager knows how to contact you and where you're located. Okay, now the easy part is done. The next part is a brief summary. I typically like seeing a brief summary in resumes because it gives me a really good idea of the general background of the person, what makes them stand out, and also what is it that they're looking for. So some typically omit this section and jump straight into the experience, but I personally love seeing the brief summary on the resumes because this shows me that the candidate took their time to explain what their goals are, what they're really good at, and what makes them stand out, but also how do they think and why do they think that their candidacy fits really well for this specific role. The best summaries are precise and concise. I like to stick to just 2 to 3 sentences long, and your goal here is really to highlight what makes you stand out from everyone else. Don't just list all the skills and all the software that you know how to use. Don't write things like, I'm detail-oriented, I'm a team player, I'm very organized, because everyone puts those things in the resume, no matter whether they actually possess those skills or not. Now, there's other ways how you can highlight and communicate some of the qualities that you possess, and I'm going to cover that a little bit later in the video. Ideally, I'd recommend to tweak your brief summary for every single company you're applying for. And I know it may not be necessarily super scalable, but if you're a salesperson applying for a clean energy company, trust me, if you have a side project, a side recycling project or something like that going on, trust me, mentioning that on your brief summary will come a long way. One point to add here is that if your profession or role requires some professional designation or professional certification, things like PMP for project management, Prince 2, or maybe some engineering designation and so on and so forth, or maybe you have an MBA, make sure you highlight it either next to your name in the header or in the brief summary. Now let's move on to the meat and potatoes of every single resume, and it's your experience. Before you build your resume, think carefully about every single role that you've held in your career. If you have no experience to show because you're a fresh graduate, for example, I would recommend to bump the education section instead of experience here and focus on highlighting some of the projects you've done in school that could be very relevant for the role you're applying. If you do have some experience to show, make sure that you list your role, your company, and the dates of employment in that specific order. You see here, I don't specify the end date or the specific months in which I worked in the companies, and this is just my personal preference. And then you list a brief overview of your role and responsibilities. You can use your judgment and specifics of your field on how much to include. Ideally, everything that's longer than 4 to 5 sentences and 3 to 4 lines is considered way too long. So one of the things for you to keep in mind as you're building your resume is that the average time spent on a single resume by a recruiter is about 8 seconds. 8 seconds is not a lot of time. So oftentimes a recruiter will just skim through your resume, they'll look for some keywords or some specific things that they care about the most, and then they'll decide whether you're moving forward in the process or not just based on that. Your goal is to optimize for that time and make sure that your resume gives the most critical and crucial information to the recruiter within the first minute of looking at it. And one of the things that I like to advise people to do when they're building a resume is not to just think about their roles in terms of responsibilities or their job requirements, but also about their accomplishments. Your responsibilities are generic. Every single job description has roughly the same job descriptions, right? So what is it that makes you stand out if everyone does the same exact job? Well, the answer is your accomplishments. No one wants a candidate who just gets by in the work and does the minimum and just their 9 to 5, clocks in and clocks out. Employers usually look for outliers. They look for top performance. They look for people who excel in their roles because that means that they will excel in their following role as well. So your goal as an applicant is to show how exceptional you are in everything that you do. And you do that through demonstrating your accomplishments in your CV. For instance, did you implement new processes? Did you launch new products? Did you bring new sales or customers? Did you help a company make or save money? This is what will make you stand out from the crowd the most. Don't say that you have a good attention to detail here. Talk about your accomplishments that demonstrated that you have a very high attention to detail and show what impact it had on your role or your company. It's also a good idea to qualify your accomplishments where appropriate. If you built a team, say how big your team was and how many people you hired. If you helped a company save money or make sales, state the approximate numbers, if you can disclose them, of course. If you've held several roles with overlapping roles and responsibilities, try to avoid repetition in your resume. Don't say manage the teams or the processes in every single role that you've had. Focus on your accomplishments or some of these special and differentiating things that you've done in each role. Also, make sure that you show some progression or growth in your career and in your roles. Show how you've moved up from being junior to the senior professional. Show how the size and the importance of projects has gradually grown throughout your career. If you're a people manager, show how the size of your team and the success of your team grown after you've taken the lead. You should also keep the relevant roles on your resume. Don't put your Uber driving experience on the resume if you're applying for an engineering position. However, if you're applying for another service job, your Uber driving experience might be super relevant for that because it is still within the realm of customer service. So you can put that on your CV and share your rating or maybe some of the amazing passenger feedback that you've received in the past. But otherwise, generally stay away from irrelevant job experience. It will only confuse the recruiter and will leave them wondering why on earth are you applying for this job in the first place. So the next section here that I would recommend to look into is other experience. And this experience can be important in some specific cases. So let's say you have recently graduated or you don't have enough relevant Canadian experience to show because you've moved from another country. Or maybe you've just changed professions. You can also add other experience to increase the strength of your candidacy to the position you're applying for. Here are a few examples. So let's say you're a young professional and you're applying for a managerial or people leadership role, but you don't have any managerial experience. At the same time, you have led a summer camp in the past, or you've done some volunteering where you've demonstrated some of your leadership skills. Well, this other experience section is the ideal place to demonstrate that. Speaking of volunteering, I'm a big proponent of showing some of the volunteering work that you've done on your resume. Social good is very much valued in Canada. It's important to give back and specify your volunteering engagements, your role, and the brief descriptions of what you've done. And if you don't have enough work experience in Canada, volunteering can serve very well as a replacement for your main experience when you're applying for a relevant job. And that's exactly what I've done in the past. When I arrived to Canada, within the first year, I joined a volunteering organization that's called St. John's Ambulance. I became very involved in that organization and I eventually became a staff member, and I held a role of operations coordinator where I would coordinate all of our activities and events that our volunteering team would be covering. What that meant is that I did a lot of scheduling, I did a lot of communications and equipment management, and some of the customer management as well. And those were some of the important skills that I had to demonstrate. Very much applicable for for some of the roles that I applied later on in life. Freelancing, consulting, or your entrepreneurial experience are also very great things to put into your other experience section. If you have some exciting projects that you worked on, it's an opportunity for you to demonstrate the other part of you that some of your former roles never gave you opportunities for. Or maybe you can show the relevancy for the role that you're applying for by doing some of the side projects. I, for instance, did a little bit of marketing and design consulting early on in my career. And when I applied for my very first product management internship, I got hired specifically because my hiring manager saw that I had some design and marketing background, and that was specifically what they were looking for. So the next section is education. And education can be a tricky one, depending on the amount of experience you have and which industry you work in. If you're a fresh graduate, it would make sense to put your education at the very top of the resume because you don't have much experience to show. But if you do have a lot of experience to show, experience always is valued over the education that you have. In Canada, people don't pay too much attention into the school that you went to or even the GPA that you've had when you graduated. There are, however, some roles like management consulting, finance, investment banking that will look at your GPA and will look at the prestige of your school in some cases, if there is a very high competition for the roles that you're applying for. But generally speaking, lean on your experience as much as you can. And I would even say that your volunteering matters a lot more than your education because it shows your work ethic, it shows your performance, and it just shows your aspirations and motivations a little bit more. And what you do here, it's pretty easy and straightforward. You specify your degree level, your program, your university, and location. Some of the things that I've done in the past as well, along with education, I also specify different associations and causes that I participated during my university time. And I think it could help, especially early in your career, because it shows how ambitious you are, how hardworking you are, and how much you like to give back and help your communities. So if you were part of your student magazine or participated in some associations or organized some events, do put it in your background. It would definitely help, especially if it could be relevant for the role you're applying for. So that's pretty much an overview of what a good resume would look like. I've touched up on some of the most critical components for you to include, but your resume and CV is really your own to tailor and shape in any way that you think it represents you best. And if you liked this resume, please leave a comment below and let me know if you want to have a template of that. I'll be happy to share that with you guys. So next, I'm going to share some of the general considerations and other tips and tricks with you. But before I do that, if you're finding this video interesting and valuable so far, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And if you want to support us even more, please buy us a coffee using the link in the description below. And if you have some interesting additional points to share about what makes a successful resume, please share that with the audience. Leave a comment below so that others can benefit from your knowledge. So there's a few things I want to also make sure that we highlight. Keep the format of your resume standard. As I mentioned before, recruiters like to spend as little time as possible going through the CVs, so you want to make sure that it looks familiar and it's very easy to find what they are looking for. Make sure that the layout is easy to read. Each section is labeled clearly and separated. Keep your resume short. If you don't have a lot of experience, 1 page is more than enough, but if you have a little bit more experience that you would like to show, 2 pages is a good number to stick to as well. And as a hiring manager, I'll also say that we have an extra appreciation for people who take their time to tailor their CV to the job they're applying, because it just shows that they care. And when I say tailor your CV, I mean tweak your summary on just to highlight some of the things that you think are very relevant for the role you're applying for. Examine the job description a little bit deeper and see what are some of the terminology or the languages that the job description uses, and make sure to use the same language and terminology in your CV. It will make the recruiter's job a lot easier to read and understand your CV and your candidacy. Also, I've seen a lot of resumes adding their personal interests or some personal information about hobbies and things like that. I personally don't think that it adds a lot of value to your resume, but if you do feel like sharing some of your passions because you think that they would be relevant for the job applications, you can always use the brief summary section to specify that. So for example, if you're applying for a car sales job, you could probably talk about how passionate you are about cars and how you've been collecting cars as your hobby. In some countries, adding photos or your marital and family status is something that's expected, while in Canada, these are big no-nos. Do not add your picture and do not show your family or marital status in your resume. No one cares about that, and I'll even say more to that. If an employer asks you about your marital status, sexual orientation, or anything like that, it is illegal. Run away from them. And lastly, once you've done building a resume, don't rush sending it out. Go get a cup of tea or coffee. Just sit it out, think about it a little bit more, come back to it the following day. See if you want to change anything. See if you want to tweak some things. Maybe there's some typos. There are some recruiters or hiring managers that are very strict about the quality of the resumes and some grammar mistakes or typos. So always make sure that it's proofread and it's grammatically correct. And if you're still wondering about cover letters, on whether you have to write it, how to write it, and when to write it, please leave a comment below. We will look into making a video on that later. And with all that said, I hope this was useful for you. Again, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel, or buy us a coffee in the description box below. And keep us posted on how your job search is going and whether these tips and tricks have been helpful for you. And I'll see you next time. Bye guys.